With me, Denise and Becky, that are the co-chairs for education. And today we have a roundtable that's focused on DEI from a legal standpoint with Allison Crane. But before we get started, I want to do an introduction of our sponsor, which is Tony Tovar, that's going to be talking about Sana benefits.
Hi, good morning, guys. My name is Tony. I am the head of community for Sana Benefits. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick overview just because I'm excited to be presenting at your SHRM chapter. Sana is basically a health insurance plan similar to Humana, Aetna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, United Healthcare. We're actually headquartered in Austin, Texas, and woohoo, we're finally expanding in the Illinois area, in the Kentucky area. So I'm actually virtually traveling all over the SHRM chapters in the Illinois and the Kentucky area. Something that you need to know about Sana is that we're easy to use admin toolkit. We provide a single benefits login so you can manage your medical, dental, vision, and life. We also provide better copays and co-insurance, and we have the best satisfaction scores in the industry. If you have a health insurance broker and they never heard about us, tell them to go to our main website at www.sanabenefits.com. There's a broker tab, and there's some information that they can take from there, and they can learn more about us. I've done a lot of broker roadshows, and they're also learning more about us. If you're like an HR director and you directly work with the health plan, we can do that as well. You can ask for a quote, and we actually generate a quick quote less than 4 days, to be honest with you. So that's actually pretty fast for industry. All you need to submit is a simple employee census. We do not ask the personal health questionnaires. A simple census is the first name, last name, date of birth, gender, and home zip code. I have another slide and I'm almost done. Just to let you know, your rates are your rates. And the reason why we can do this because we are our own underwriter. So we can set the price and that's how we can easily generate the quote for you guys. We work directly with you. Again, if you want to work with, if you have a broker and you love your broker, have them call us. And we also negotiate all claims. So we do reference-based pricing. I'm going to be doing a lot of events all over Illinois. You're probably going to run into me. So I'm excited. I'm originally from Chicago. I went to elementary, high school, and university. So I'm happy that I'm finally going to go to my home state instead of being here in Texas. So check us out. We also have an amazing event next week. Yeah, it is next week. We're going to be offering a free event that has virtual yoga, meditation, all through ClassPass, and also a wine workshop. I'll give you guys the link. And if you guys do sign up for that, I actually mail you a bottle compliments of Sana to your home. So it's a really fun event. I'm going to be emceeing it. So you guys get a chance to learn more about Sana, and we get to celebrate that Sana is finally in your home state. So thank you so much, guys. And if you do ask for a quote from Sana Benefits, give your SHRM chapter credit. Let them know where you learned about them. Just say like, oh, Tony came and did a presentation at blah, 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 blah. And they'll be like, oh, okay, so we know which SHRM chapter. And that's because I go everywhere.
Tony, I love your passion and your excitement. Is there any way in the chat you can stick those links to those events so that our group can have it? And then on top of that, Kristen can send it out in the email that we sent as a recap today.
Yeah, and the reason why I have that much energy, I actually did a 5-mile run. So I have a lot of endorphins in me right now. I actually ran the Chicago Marathon 4 times, and I'm planning to hopefully run it again as soon as stuff comes back normal. So thank you so much, guys. I want to sponsor again, and I'm so fortunate that you guys let me be a part of your event today. Thank you.
Tony, thanks for joining us. I appreciate all the information, and we're excited to partner with you. Allison, I'm going to turn it over to you. She's our speaker today, and she's going to be talking about DEI from a legal standpoint. Welcome, Allison.
Hi, thanks so much, Katie. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Allison Crane. I'm the Legislative Director for NHRC and have been for the past few years. I am also a partner at Jackson Lewis in their Chicago office. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Jackson Lewis, We're a national labor and employment firm. So I'm an employment attorney. I partner with HR professionals all day, every day. And I am really excited to talk with you guys about this topic. This is something that's sort of at the front of everyone's organization right now. There's been just a lot of activity in this space. And I would love if today could be sort of an interactive conversation. I have some prepared content, but please do jump in if people have questions, stories that they want to share about their own experiences, what their organizations might be doing. I think that would be a lot of fun and really informative for all of us. So let's get things kicked off. My contact information is on the front page of the presentation, which we can certainly send to you guys so you have it. Depending on how time goes, there are some embedded videos and things like that that are really interesting and really good examples. We may not have time to get to all of them today, but I would encourage you to take a little time and check it out when you're able. So at a high level, we'll talk about what unconscious bias is. We'll talk about what inclusion really means, why these issues should matter to your organization, and why these issues should matter to you personally. So hopefully you guys can all see this picture. This is an American Red Cross advertisement, and it looks a little bit dated, but believe it or not, this is from 2016. And if you look at it, it sort of gives examples of a behavior that are quote cool and quote not cool. So we have some kids that are doing good things around a pool, and we have a number of other kids that are doing things that would be inappropriate around a pool. And when you take time to really analyze this picture, you will notice that all of the kids that are engaged in the quote not cool activity have a darker skin tone. And, I have to think that this was not done purposefully, but this is an example of how our own unconscious biases creep in. And, this can be a real consequence when we're not thinking about these things, because there was a lot of negative PR from this ad campaign, as you can imagine. Here's another example. This is a Dove soap ad campaign, and this one is from 2017. So these are fairly recent examples where, again, a group of marketing folks at a major company got together and thought it was a good example to basically depict a number of different images where we have soap changing a skin tone from dark to light. So, I've given this presentation a number of times, and I've sat through this presentation a number of times too, and it's sort of uncomfortable to take a deep dive and look at yourself and think about areas where you may have blind spots, because I think everyone wants to think that they're open-minded and they're progressive. But the exercise today is to sort of show us that all of us have areas where we can improve, and to give us some tools to kind of think about ways to address this differently, especially in the workplace. So I want to start with sort of a basic discussion of what unconscious bias is. And to illustrate that, we're going to do a little exercise. So if you guys will all just close your eyes and listen along, please. I want you to sort of visualize this scene that I'm going to describe like a movie, if you can. And then I'll ask you some questions when we're done. Imagine that you are running errands on a Saturday morning and driving on a 4-lane road when a car comes up really fast behind you. It tailgates you for a few seconds and then swerves into the lane next to you, speeding past your car. As the car passes, you hear loud music coming from inside the car, and you see 2 people in the front seats. The car is going so fast that you lose sight of it down the road after a few seconds. But a few minutes later, you see a police car with flashing lights up ahead off on the side of the road. As you get closer, you spot the speeding car parked in front of the police car. As you approach, you can see one of the officers standing in front of both cars with the driver and the passenger. As you pass by, you can see one of the officers holding a baggie up in the air, while the other officer starts to handcuff one of the other passengers. So let me ask you some questions about what you saw. And if anyone wants to volunteer some of the answers, I think that would be a lot of fun. What kind of car did you see in your mind that sped up behind you and past you?
A red Mustang.
Monte Carlo.
Okay, so you guys are sort of thinking about some sports cars maybe. What about the two people that you visualized in the car? How old were they? Who saw them? Did you see two men, two women, one of each?
I assume they were two young guys.
Same here, two young men.
Okay.
I thought of young hippie people.
And what about the music? What type of music did you imagine coming out of the car as it passed you?
Rap.
Rap music with the bass.
And what was in the baggie that the police officer was holding up?
Drugs.
Mhm.
Coke.
How about the two police officers? Did you envision them being two men, two women, one of each?
Two men.
Two men.
Mhm. What about the race of the police officers?
I didn't really see race.
I didn't either.
I just saw a man and a woman.
Okay. So this is just sort of a great example of how our mind will fill in the blanks when we don't have certain pieces of information. And, you know, this information may have been filled in based on situations you had encountered in the past, based on, you know, certain stereotypes you may have that, you know, police officers are men, or, you know, people that are driving fast cars, it would be a sports car, and it would be, you know, two younger kids listening to rap music, right? So it's just sort of a good example of how our mind uses unconscious thought to fill in the gaps. And studies have shown that about 80% of our thoughts are unconscious. And these are just sort of automatic, impulsive, intuitive, gut instinct kinds of reactions. And the reason why our mind works that way is because we're operating on cognitive overload. We just have so many things coming at us all the time. And we need to have this mechanism to help us make sense of the world. So your unconscious mind is influenced by so many different factors. It can be, you know, how you grew up, experiences that you've had in your own personal lives. It can be your own personal values, your educational experiences, you know, and I think now more than ever, cultural influences, especially things that we see in the media. You know, the world has changed a lot in the last 20 or 30 years. You know, and if you think of what a lawyer looked like 20 or 30 years ago, you probably wouldn't picture me, right? And, you know, I've been practicing for 15 years. So part of it is just kind of changing the way we envision things. If someone asked you, you know, to think of a lawyer, you know, what is that image that your mind conjures up? And I don't want to say any of this stuff to make us feel bad today. It's really just about awareness and, you know, having these things in front of mind so we can do things to actively engage and interrupt some of our biases. So, you know, again, the shortcuts that our mind takes are a good thing in many respects because it saves time and energy and it helps us make sense of the world. We literally would not be able to function without these. Just sort of think about when you used to drive to work or when you drive to the grocery store nowadays. You're probably not conscious of every little step you take. You're sort of on automatic pilot as you get there. And we need to do that because we can't process all of the information that we're being bombarded with. But it's important to keep in mind that this level of cognitive efficiency often comes at the price of accuracy. So as we talk today, let's just accept this fact that we're all human and we all have different biases. We can't control our unconscious thoughts, but there are things we can do to monitor our thoughts on a conscious level. If you have time, Google implicit association tests. There are some really fun quizzes that you can take that give you more examples of this. So let's talk a little bit about what this looks like from a legal perspective. We're probably all aware of the biases on the left side of the screen. So sexism, racism, ageism, these are sort of the structural and systemic biases that have historical roots. And the Supreme Court and the courts in Illinois and every other state across the country have decided that discrimination based on these factors on the left is unlawful. And the reason why is because it poses a particular threat to our society and it undermines what we call our fundamental rights. Now, on the right side, we have the cognitive biases. And these are the biases that allow the social biases to exist. So those are the reasons why we have instances of discrimination and prejudice. And again, all of these biases serve a purpose to help us structure the world. But when they're applied to the social categories on the left, they become problematic and often illegal. So let's try another exercise here. Take a look at these two pictures and listen to the following. There are lots of people at the place where I work, but there is one person who is really special. This person is really, really smart. This person figures out how to do things quickly and comes up with the answers much faster and much better than anyone else on our team. This person is really a rising star. Who in the photo do you think is the smart person in the story?
The female.
Woman.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone else who thought it was the man? So this picture and that little blurb was actually used in a recent study that was conducted by NYU and Princeton. And the researchers in that study asked the same questions to literally hundreds of school-age children that were 6 and 7. And even at age 6 and 7, the little girls were significantly less likely to pick the woman. And so that's just an example of how pervasive bias can be and how ingrained it is, even at a very early age. So let's spend a little bit of time sort of exploring the different cognitive biases. We'll start with the illusion of objectivity. And this is basically the belief that we understand the world by direct perception. So we think that we can see the real world clearly. But it's a fact that our understanding of even the simplest concepts is guided by layers of cognitive process. We know that if we believe we are biased, it will actually increase our biases because we won't be able to interrupt them. So you have to actively doubt your objectivity to be able to interrupt your bias. So here's another example of a resume study that was recently conducted. The exact same resume was used with the same credentials and the same work experience. And there was a male and a female resume. And so the study was conducted using the names Lakeisha and Jamal versus Emily and Greg. And the study found that the white signaling names Emily and Greg received 50% more callbacks when everything else was the same. And so that's a great example of how, individuals were not acknowledging the effect that diverse sounding names had on them. And as a result, they couldn't take steps to interrupt that bias. The next type of bias is availability bias. And this is the tendency to let an example that comes to mind easily affect decision-making or reasoning. So a good example could be someone who wants to find a reason not to have to quit smoking. So they'll cite a story about a 100-year-old smoker who they had just seen on TV. Or people being afraid to fly after hearing about a plane crash, even though intellectually we all know that air travel is probably safer than driving in a car. An example in your workplace could be someone who makes 2 mistakes in a row, so you assume that they won't be able to handle an upcoming large project, even though you had worked with them for years in the past without any sort of problems. Another example is how the lottery works. You promote the winners so that it seems more likely to win than it actually is. Next is attribution bias. This is where you're filling in the blanks for the reason that someone did something. And when you're filling in the blanks, we all naturally give more benefit of the doubt to people that are similar to ourselves than to other people. So for example, if you forget to call somebody back, it's just because you were busy and you had a heavy workload. But if someone else forgets to call you back, you may think it's because they're disorganized, because they're lazy, maybe they intentionally didn't call you back. And this is sort of the idea of in-group versus out-group. If a person in your in-group gets a DUI, you may say, oh, well, he or she is a good person and they just made this one mistake that one time. It could happen to any of us. But if someone in your out-group gets a DUI, you might say, that person is so negligent, they should be, punished to the fullest extent of the law, they should be thrown in jail. The next one is anchoring bias. And this is the idea that an initial valuation influences the final valuation without you even knowing it. So for example, we all know that Tesla is an expensive car, and the price tag may make you believe it's actually a better car than other vehicles. But in reality, is it that much better than a Prius or something comparable to that? Is the dollar value actually influencing how you're looking at it? A good example of that in the workplace can be salaries. If you know what someone's prior salary history was as they're interviewing, you may end up setting their new salary based on the old salary instead of what they're actually worth or what the actual market value is for the position. The next is confirmation bias. You guys may have seen this ad campaign for Buick. And the idea is that, here we have a woman whose friend is in a car and she's, this hip, cool, young woman out on the town, and her friend is saying, well, I don't see you anywhere. You couldn't possibly be in the Buick, right? Because that's sort of traditionally thought as a brand that's not as young and not as hip. And then the last one that we'll talk about today is affinity bias. And this is the idea, again, that we're favoring people who are like us and who have similar interests. I'm going to see if I can show you this video just because I think it's really cute. see if this works.
Allison, we just can't hear the sound on it.
Right, so the idea is, he saw that all of the, important people at the company had bald heads, and so he wants to fit in, right? And he wants to get a leg up on the other folks that might be interviewing for the position. So just to kind of close out this segment, unconscious bias can result in the same negative consequences as bias and discrimination. And there's another link to a video that I would encourage you guys to spend some time looking at later. So what can we do to interrupt our unconscious biases? The first step is being very cognizant of instances where it's likely to creep in. So when we're experiencing cognitive overload, when we have decisions that we have to make that are very time pressured, when we're in stressful situations, we sort of default to these natural tendencies. When there's an unstructured process, when we're in ambiguous situations, again, we sort of default to the easy and the automatic, and when we need to make subjective decisions. So here are some general tactics that we can all try to utilize. Just showing up today is a great first step, right? You're obviously committed to thinking about these issues and bringing some of this information back into your workplace and hopefully relaying some of it to your teams. So, take time throughout your workday to remind yourself about the impact that implicit bias can have. Try to slow down when you're making difficult decisions. I know we hear so much about finding ways to de-stress, especially now that we're in year 2 of the pandemic, but to the extent you can, add structure around process. And this can be especially important when you're conducting performance reviews, when you're making elevation decisions within your organization. Embed bias busters. So a great example is that resume study. You may want to utilize a tactic where we have name blind resumes, where you take names and addresses off. And so you're not allowing any of those implicit biases to creep in. And adding an oversight. So, having multiple decision makers for some of these bigger picture issues. And hopefully people coming with diverse perspectives. So we like to call this exercising your abs. There's sort of 3 areas you can work on. The first is awareness, then some of the behavioral changes that we'll talk about, and then some overarching structural changes. So awareness is really important, paying attention to surprises and times when your stereotypes were not correct. Paying attention to uncomfortable situations that you encounter in the workplace or in your own life. Like I mentioned, consider training your teams on these issues. One thing that we have a lot of our clients doing right now is conducting climate studies. And there's all different ways that you can structure those. But, doing interviews, having them fill out surveys, getting an understanding of what the issues are and what some of the blind spots of your organization may be can be really helpful. In terms of some behavioral changes, we're encouraging everyone to really seek out diversity initiatives. In your own personal lives, try to seek lots of different experiences where you're exposed to people that maybe you wouldn't be exposed to normally. I recently joined an organization that had this goal of promoting women and relationships amongst women and referral partners. And I didn't realize that it was a predominantly Black organization at the time I joined, because someone had mentioned it to me and said, you should check it out. But it's been amazing to find the different perspectives that some of these ladies have, some of the experiences that they've had growing their businesses. And they've been tremendously welcoming to me. And it's just been a really neat experience. And it's not something that I would have probably actively sought out, but it's just been phenomenal. Working to increase your motivation to be fair and unbiased, trying to find commonalities with others, which I think we're all trying to do nowadays as we're more isolated and working from home predominantly. Putting mechanisms in place in your organization to audit decisions for affinity bias, and really taking time to put yourself in other people's shoes. And there's so many ways we can do this. I think it's great when you're putting out any sort of visuals to your company. If you can show examples of images that maybe we don't have at the front of our mind, so we can start normalizing those things. So here, we have a man who's doing some work around the house, a female pilot, things along those lines. So here are some ideas, and I hope we can sort of open this up relatively soon to hear what some of you guys might be doing in your organizations. But, at the end of the day, we need to kind of figure out, how does this all fit together? So if you work to interrupt your unconscious bias, you're going to have a more diverse organization. And when you have a more diverse organization, in turn, you'll have a more inclusive organization. So what does day-to-day inclusion look like in the workplace? One thing that I've been trying to do is really focus on using inclusive language. So saying things like a spouse or a partner instead of assuming it's a husband or a wife. Trying to take more interest in getting to know people on a personal level. Working to speak up when you notice that a person or a specific group might be excluded from certain decisions. There's going to be missteps in every organization, and using those missteps as sort of teachable moments, and not being afraid to address those issues head on. Listening and engaging as an ally, and taking the time to have some challenging conversations. So I'm sure a lot of you are focused on trying to create opportunities for everyone to have a voice and to present their views. Mentoring others from different segments within your organization can be a great idea. If you do conduct some sort of climate survey or an engagement survey, actually taking that data to heart and using that data to make improvements within your organization. Seeking to promote opportunities where people can participate in activities, where they can sort of see diversity in action. Setting performance goals. Oops. And, working to make sure that this is at the front of mind for everyone. So that's sort of the end of the formal piece of this presentation. But I would love it if we could sort of start an engaged conversation about what people might be seeing in their organizations, what issues are popping up, what initiatives your companies might be taking on, and so forth. So with that, if anyone would like to jump in.
Hey, Allison, Tom Kennedy here. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Tom?
Fine, thank you. Got a couple of questions for you. First of all, thank you very much. It's a fascinating topic. And I guess a couple of comments or concerns I have. One is to change people's attitudes, their beliefs, I think takes generations. And the whole concept of how we treat people is based on who we are, where we came from, our environments. And I guess the question I have is, how do we impact consciousness raising before behavioral change? And especially important with the media, with all of what's going on in our crazy world. And my client, two of my big clients, I realized that the prejudices that exist, and this is going to be probably an unconscious bias, but I'm going to say it, that a lot of the people I work with are from rural America and have opinions that are very contrary to an inclusive United States. In general, they question why we have laws that allow people from various parts of the world to come here. And these are people of all ages, not only people of my generation, but people who are young, many of whom we saw on the Capitol steps recently. And that's probably a bias there too. So I guess, what are your thoughts, Allison, as to how companies can address what people are exposed to every day by the media, by family and friends, and still try to change their mindsets? So I'll stop there.
Yeah, gosh, and that's a tall order, right? I think the first step is just sort of awareness. And I also think we have to understand that we probably won't be able to necessarily change their views, but we may be able to educate them about how their views are impacting decisions, and, perhaps give them a little bit of fear that if they're acting upon certain views in the workplace specifically, that can open the company as well as themselves individually to significant exposure and liability.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes I think, I like to think that people want to make these changes because it's the right thing to do. But there certainly are people out there who don't agree with that. But maybe the best way to get through to them is to sort of show them that, these things can and do go very wrong, and there are very real consequences, and kind of laying out what the different consequences can be, right? So a significant financial impact to the organization, to themselves personally, the time and the emotional drain of defending claims, the negative PR that can come along with this. There's a number of brands that have taken just significant hits because of very public missteps on some of these things.
Yeah, it was like in the Tribune today, had the article about Aunt Jemima is now called Pearl Milling or something like that. It changed the name of the product. So thank you. And to your point, and I'll just stop here, is that the whole issue of doing surveys, I've done a couple of corporate culture surveys, not with the intent of implicit bias, but it really came out as to how the organization's culture was impacted by the way they treat people in a variety of ways. Especially, I found age to be a huge issue. So anyways.
Yeah. And Tom, in those instances, what did the company do once they had that information gathered?
Yeah, it's a long process. It's really like the flywheel. It takes time. First of all, was for them to look at the results to see that what is interfering with them creating the desired culture. They come up, they model what they think is the perfect culture, the owners, the senior management, and everybody takes a couple of surveys. And what they're finding is that the causal factors, those issues that form the climate, are interfering with establishing a corporate culture that is consistent with what they want. And it's usually a corporate culture where they increase profitability. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But they realize what's standing in the way of that. And it's the way they treat people is ultimately what it's all about.
Agreed. Anyone else who would like to share, what your organization is doing? I know Katie, yours is very progressive and committed to these types of issues.
Yeah, we're taking a really big stance about social justice, that we're even looking at having a strategic goal about increasing our diversity by 50% by 2024. So again, that's kind of radical, because that means you have to have more diverse pools of candidates in order for that to happen. And that means we have to have more partnerships that exist. So again, I'm curious, Allison, have you seen where people have taken on a strategy related to DEI, but they haven't really thought it through, and it actually turns into a lawsuit of some type because it wasn't all thought out?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think a lot of times it's very well intentioned, but it may not be implemented in the best way. I've had people tell me stories of, well, we can only hire a specific race for this position, or we can only fill this position with a specific gender. And, while I think the goal of getting a more diverse workforce is absolutely what we should all be doing, when it becomes so specific, like this position could only be filled by this race or this gender, I think it is leaving you open to exposure for discrimination claims. It has to.
Well, my question is, how do you make it legal? What would you advise companies to do? They're all getting on the bandwagon to say, we want to take part in this diversity and inclusion. How do you make that situation legal when you say, I've got all these white females, we need people of color? How do companies go about that?
It's where you source your people from is really where it starts, Denise. And that's some of the work that my team's doing at American Family. It's about figuring out places or skill set that we haven't done the connecting of the dots. So I'll give the example, my claims division. We found out that police officers do really well in it. Asset protection people do really well because they have that investor background, that it's transitional that they can come into claims. So now I've started looking at professional groups that fall into those areas to get more people that have a diverse background to come on board. And again, when I think of diverse, that doesn't just mean the color of your skin, that just means your experience that you've had in life and bringing that into our organization. And the advice that we're giving our hiring managers, although we might be bringing more diverse pools, we always tell them to hire the best candidate. And that means that could be not someone that fits into the diverse, that might be a white male, and that's okay if they are the best qualified person for the job.
So best
Katie,
qualified person for the job is the focus, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think the idea is, if you're recruiting people that have more diverse backgrounds, there should be more instances where the best candidate is someone who has a more diverse background. And so, it sort of builds upon itself. I think historically, there were lots of roles where diverse candidates just were not being looked at.
yeah, and Allison, I think that, and back to what Katie was saying too, I think that's part of the issue. What I see with clients is that everybody is talking about diversity, and they really want to, look at a more diverse population. But when I talk to them, they don't know how to go about, they don't know where to go to look for that diversity. And that's one of the things that we're very focused on, is having a playbook, so to speak, of ways where to go to look for the candidates, so that you are looking at a global pool, not a global pool, a larger pool, be it global or not, but a larger pool of all types of candidates. But it's knowing where to go, and it's not just going to LinkedIn and looking at things, so, but that's what I see in talking to a number of different companies, is that the recruiters, they would love to do it, but they just don't know how. And so that's why, part of my focus is looking at that and helping people with that. That's, I think, one of the big stumbling blocks that people are trying to get over. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the idea of the named blind resumes can be, a great way to do that. So instead of saying, instead of picking Emily and Greg, we're going to actively pick Lakeisha and Jamal. That's a way to sort of say, hey, we're looking at the credentials, we're looking at the backgrounds, and we'll find the best candidate for the job. So, it's not necessarily giving some people an advantage or other people a disadvantage. It's just sort of neutralizing those factors.
Yeah, I agree. It's just being able to knowing where to go to even look where you could get those, name
Yeah.
blind resumes, because, if you're only focused on one piece, LinkedIn or wherever it is, you're leaving out all kinds of places where, people could be open to listening and interested in your company. So yeah, I think it's a combination.
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah, I was going to say grassroots approach has really worked out well for some organizations that I've seen, where they're really starting to utilize the community, similar to the roundtable that we had a few months ago, talking about how do you do the grassroots approach. That is a great way to start building connections locally or wherever you might be hiring for that position.
Can I add something from the sponsor point of view? Like, I can tell you what we're doing as a company. I'm the head of community, so one of the things that I was asked by my leadership team last year was to be aware of what type of events we are sponsoring. Like, if we notice that a round table is full of like one certain type of minority, like all white guys especially, in a round table, and it doesn't include like women CEOs or men CEOs or Black CEOs. They're like, we want you to pull out, and we want you to ask the event organizer if they can be nice to invite others. We can hear different type of input as a way for us to support, to have a different type of diverse conversation. So I have these initiatives where I really try to like look for those events, but like I also look at the panel now, and I didn't used to do that before. Um, that was my bias. Like I've been doing activation for more than 10 years all over, even in the Taste of Chicago, and I never realized this until my leadership team set me down and they're like, hey, we really want to do this. We want to like also show that we can be all diverse. Like share the podium, basically.
This is Denise Weiger. I know a lot of you are not federal contractors, but there is OFCCP website, and you can go in there and there's a library of different outreach sources, women, minorities, all kinds of places. So you can actually sign up for, get in touch with those organizations and send your jobs. So that would be a great part of different diversity sites. So I just wanted to add that.
Can you repeat that site again, Denise?
It's Office of Federal, excuse me, I was just drinking. Office of Federal Compliance is called, just Google OFCCP, and there's a library of all kinds of sites, diversity sites, all kinds of things. Great outreach sources, by the way.
Thank you.
Yep, anytime.
Allison, how has your viewpoint changed after doing these types of presentations and realizing that we all have biases? How does that affect you in the job that you're doing?
Yeah, so it's interesting because on the one hand, I'm an employer just like all of us, right? I'm a member of leadership at a firm. So it's interesting. I mean, I think we're especially conscious of these things, and also want to make sure that we're not making any missteps. So we have a number of attorney resource groups, sort of affinity groups that we've recently gotten off the ground. I'd be curious to see if other people have done things like that in their organizations and how it's working. So we have a whole host. We have LGBTQ groups. We have groups for working parents, which, I think a lot of us have been struggling with over the last, year or so. And I think it's great because it gives people an opportunity to come together to talk about issues that they may be facing. We're very careful to make sure that the groups are open to everyone, right? So, for example, we have a practicing and parenting group, and most people that come do have kids at home and they're trying to navigate what that looks like. but it's open to everyone. And, we've had some younger associates that come to the meetings and they're interested in these issues, and it's a safe space for them to come and say, hey, we may be starting families soon. So trying to find ways to support people like that. Have any of you other guys developed affinity groups or anything along those lines? Doesn't sound like it. Katie, have you guys done anything like that?
We do. We had 4 last year and then added 4 more at the end of last year and started to get really into more specifics because we had people showing interest. So like
That's
South
great.
Pacific Asian didn't exist. So we added that. So again, just making it Asian, we've now divided that up into 2 different groups so that people feel comfortable because there is a difference with those cultures. So yeah, we've started expanding out because of interest. If no one showed interest, we probably wouldn't. So now we have 8 options when someone joins. The biggest issue I see though is letting people know that these groups do exist or how you can get involved so that you have that community. Because I know when I started at American Family last year in May, starting during a remote job during COVID, I didn't know how to make connections with people, but I joined the women's group and that felt like my community and my safe place. Because again, I'm a single mom, so I want to connect with other people that might be going through the challenges that I'm going through with e-learning on top of working a job. And so that's kind of how I started to build relationships at work. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think part of this too is, not just thinking about sort of the obvious categories, but, thinking about, are we supporting working parents? Are we expecting more of folks who don't have children? I'll hear people say that to me from time to time. Well, I don't know what this person's problem is. They don't have kids at home and they don't have e-learning and they should be able to, pick up the slack. And, is that fair? So it's kind of thinking about it in ways that may not be the obvious ones too.
Allison, I have one more question. One of my clients has struggled with all of what's gone on in the past year and to try to create dialogue in the workplace that's constructive as opposed to what goes on, over the proverbial water cooler or break time. And those conversations have tended to be very divisive, where you have those who have no tolerance for quote unquote Black Lives Matter or the people that stormed the Capitol. So you got those 2 extremes. And what the chief HR officer is trying to do is to create a constructive environment, lunch and learns, some kind of conversation to talk about those topics, as opposed to just letting them go on under the surface, so to speak. So I don't know if other companies have bitten that bullet, but they've not had success yet in doing that.
What has been the challenge to having it be successful? Just that it becomes sort of divisive and everyone retreats to where they kind of started from? Yeah,
I think that it's how to do that in a way that doesn't escalate people's emotions. And it would have to be both virtual and in person. We have about 2,500 employees around the US, and they've really noticed it interfering with the way people work together. And it's like, it comes up in a conversation, whatever it is, the politics of the day, and it alienates people from being able to work constructively with each other. And so they tend to avoid it like it doesn't exist, but it is affecting people's work relationships. So they haven't been able to figure out what to do. And I think it's more of, they got their day jobs and that's the focus right now, all the normal stuff of running the business.
I think you have to be realistic. You're not going to be able to change everyone's mind, but by having some of these conversations, I do think you will be able to get through to some folks. And some of this is going to take a significant amount of time, but little by little, you're sort of raising awareness and chipping away and hopefully affecting some change. And it really does have to start at the highest levels of an organization for it to be able to trickle down in a meaningful way.
Allison, I appreciate you coming and speaking with us today. This was a great topic. And again, I think it's going to continue to be a hot topic these upcoming years because people are trying to take a more diverse approach. But again, biases do get in the way. So how do we keep that in the front? So thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. Thanks for everybody that joined us today. Want to let you know our topic in March is going to be related to imposter syndrome. So we're going to have 2 speakers that specialize in that, bringing their thoughts about imposter syndrome because we're seeing that more and more with COVID. Mike, I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to say before we sign off.
No, just thanks everyone for Allison. Thanks for the presentation. That's it. Definitely look for the next upcoming events. Check out the new website if you haven't as well. So.
Yeah, and thank you guys. If anyone would like a copy of the materials from today, just shoot me an email and I'm happy to send it to you.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Allison. This was very useful.
We'll put Allison's contact information in the email that Kristen sends to you, and then we'll also send you our YouTube channel so you guys can review this recording. But thank you, and everybody have a great day.
Okay, thanks
Bye.
guys. Bye-bye.